Hi guys, this week we had a chance to talk to the author and researcher Merlin Sheldrake about fungi and mushrooms and all the amazing things that are going on in that world. So enjoy.
You're listening to the Forest School podcast with Lewis Ames and Gemma Southerden.
It's okay, yeah.
It's fine. It's just been raining for like 4 days.
Yeah.
You haven't missed
Yeah, it was
anything.
pretty dismal at the weekend. Yeah, that was a constellation for sure.
Although it has been, I'll tell you what, it has been frustrating listening to your book while it rains and then being like, oh, I know so much stuff is going to be growing outside now. I really want to go and see it. Oh, I've got 2 small children and they won't do too well in the rain for a long time.
Oh no, that's a problem. But I mean, they're forest school children, so they must be used to it by now.
Yeah, they know they don't get a choice.
Yeah. We've got 2 full days tomorrow and Thursday. So I'm quite excited to see what's going to be in the woods since last week. I think it would have all.
Yeah, there's plenty of damp to trigger it.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
Yeah, I was thinking about the bit. I can't remember now. I'm simultaneously listening to your audiobook, Merlin, and reading Mycelium Running.
Right.
So my life's quite mouldy at the moment, and I was thinking about the thing of introducing fungi to different woodland, because we took our kids last week, the forest school kids, on a walk to some different woodland and found loads of mushrooms, and I was like, oh, it was almost like I think it was your books. It was almost like it was hearing my train of thought, because I was like, oh, there were turkey tails in the woods over the road. That would be amazing. I should go and get them. And almost before I'd finished the thought, I think the next phrase in your book was like, but you shouldn't introduce them to just any old habitat. You should think about where they go. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think with turkey tails on rotting wood, I think it would be no problem to transfer those from wood to wood. It's more with the introducing sort of factory grown lab prepared inoculum for mycorrhizal inoculum for plants in the soil.
I'd never really thought about the sort of agro farm stuff being so one size fits all.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's improving. You can get good stuff for sure. You can get high quality inoculum, ecologically sensitive manufacturers doing this, but I think most of it, like the human probiotic stuff, is pretty one size fits all, and mainly to do with what grows well in culture.
Yeah, that bit was completely fascinating. That whole bit about farming and the fact that the different fungus in the soil will help the plant. That was just absolutely amazing. And kind of wove into that whole idea, which your book seems to be completely about kind of symbiosis, and like, where does the fungus end and the plant begin, and where do we end, and where does our kind of fungus begin?
Jesus Christ, mate, you can't start a podcast there. That's
right. But I can't. But it's a bit like I'm sure everyone who's read your book is from the reviews I've read and people I've spoken to that've read it, I had to keep on. I'm listening to it as well, and I had to keep pausing it and just spend some time just digesting like that idea, because it does challenge so much that we kind of take for granted and think we know about ourselves and the way that the world works. I wanted to ask you whether you, through your research, obviously you've been doing this a long time, do you still have that same kind of like brain melt when you discover something?
Oh yeah, absolutely. One of the things that kept happening, it was actually really difficult in the editing stages, was that I'd read something which I hadn't looked at for a little while, and I'd double take, and I'd think that it would be a terrible mistake, and so I'd either cut it or I'd have to go back into the references, and I'd find that it was actually true, but I'd hoodwink myself, and the surprise never stopped. So it actually, I tripped up on this many times, and in every case, actually, it was exactly as I'd intended it to be, and it was true. I was once again astonished.
I think that comes from, because it is such it feels to me like it's such a densely packed book. The way you describe quite big concepts and ideas in a very eloquent and kind of pared down way means that each paragraph is quite a lot to digest. Was it difficult to edit everything down to that kind of simplicity, or is that something you're quite used to?
Well, the whole writing process was an adventure, and I was just really trying to go for clarity and simplicity, and those are the sort of values, two of the values that I was holding dear, and so there was definitely a lot of editing and to get things down to as crisp as they could be, but not too crisp as to be unclear. And a lot of what I wanted to do was show, not tell. So to have these themes which lived throughout the book, which could sort of absorb into the reader without necessarily being explained in a kind of lectury way, although there has to be a bit of that, of course.
Yeah, that really comes across. Did you feel, was the book like a long time sort of formulating in your mind? And did you have it seems to me that it has a kind of a goal. I may be wrong, but sort of reading it, listening to it, it seems like you have this kind of real passion to share this amazing information with people. Like it's a real drive to educate, well, not educate, but share and go, whoa, check this out. Do you feel that? Did you feel that the book arose from that kind of wanting people to know stuff that most people don't know?
Yeah, that was definitely a part of it. The sense that this entire kingdom of life was on so few people's radars, and really should be. Both because it helps us. I think it helps us to be better humans, be more fully engaged humans, and also because if we're not engaged with these fungal lives, then we'll be blind to them, and what we're blind to, we're more likely to destroy, exploit, or whatever. So there was definitely a piece of it which was to do with that, and also it was a way for me to explore more general ideas about the living world, and fungi are so enmeshed with their environment, so enmeshed with other organisms that as soon as you start talking about fungi, you end up talking about everything else as well. So I found that it was a very good way to think more generally about our attitudes to the living world, the way we imagine our relationships, and the way that we conceive of these entities with whom we share the planet.
I think that's an interesting way, because one of the things that I think Gemma and I both do when we're doing this kind of because Forest School is basically interpret the world and help children, explore it and do these things. And quite often I feel like I'm, the children will find, as happened recently, lots of fungi on the floor, and they kind of look to you and they're half looking for some inspiration. What can I do with it? And they're half looking for a bit of, well, can you tell me about this? And the more I've been learning about fungi from your book and from other books, the more I kind of, as soon as we spot a fungi, I sort of start tripping over myself, because there's so much, and like you say, it's so interconnected that I almost go, I'm looking at a 6-year-old going, well, let me just give you this book by Merlin, right? You sit down and listen to it.
That is definitely true. It's like, what can I tell you right now that is gonna like amaze you, but not completely melt your brain? Because you're a small child, and a lot of the time I think we've said things and the kids just don't believe you. They just look at you and no, but or they just keep repeating the same thing. Like a child the other day couldn't believe that the mushroom wasn't just the mushroom. They were like, well, we've picked it, if we pick it, it's going to die. I was like, well, maybe not a great idea to pick all the mushrooms that we see, but it has a whole underground life and it could be huge. And they were just like, no, that's not true. This is the thing. And it's trying to go, that's the funny apple. That's the apple from the, from the tree. It's like that. And they were like,
wow.
No. But
in those cases,
sorry,
you go.
No, go.
In those cases, it might be that demonstration is required, some kind of some way of showing them what mycelium is, and showing them how it connects with mushrooms. Maybe in some types of soil, you can see these mycelial strands exploring around, and this is where microscopes come in handy. But that might be where the limits of explanation make themselves very, very known.
But I think that's one of the nice things is that the more you research about fungi, the more your book's kind of given me this whole sort of grab bag, and it's just paring it down and going, okay, you're ready for this little droplet of information or of wow, or even if they go away and go, yeah, I'm not breathing in mushrooms all the time, right? Don't be silly. But you just let that kind of, it is almost like you've put a little spore in their brain and just gone like, I'll just let that, work its way through, and maybe in a year you'll come back to it, or you'll remember it next time, or something else. It's that kind of slow build of knowledge and information.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I think, the fact that they're going to also repeat that to other people who won't necessarily believe them either. Like my son was completely. I was listening to it in your book in the kitchen, and he overheard the bit about fungal spores changing the weather, and he's just been repeating that to loads of people, and I think everyone's like, yeah, right, okay.
That's so funny, because there are so many parts of the fungal world which are so remarkable to us. And I actually was thinking about, it seems remarkable to our adult minds, which have often they've got deeper grooves of habit and more calcified. Exactly. Yeah, calcified is the one. And so I thought actually maybe some of the ideas would make much more sense to children, but maybe it depends on. I think it depends on how old the children are, how malleable and how open they are.
Have you had any feedback from children that have? I think that audiobooks do make things like this a lot more palatable for children. Have you had any feedback from like children or younger listeners?
No, I haven't, but I'd be very interested to hear it. I've had feedback only from older people, and there was a couple of people saying they bought it for their kids, but they were slightly older kids, 12-year-olds.
So I've just mentally gone back through the book and gone, yeah, that would all be fine. And then I remembered the large sections about psilocybin and thought, maybe that isn't the bit I would give to a kid.
Yeah.
And wine.
Although the stuff about zombie ants might be quite compelling.
Cool.
Yes.
And when I was a kid, I loved grisly stories like that when I was young.
But that was the bit that struck me. Just the comparison of that ant being taken over by a mushroom, and the I think it's I'm right saying the metaphor is that the fungus doesn't have arms and legs, so it borrows the arms and legs of the ants, and whether psychoactive mushrooms are doing that with human bodies, going, I need a mouthpiece.
Yes.
And that is so. I'm not saying I'm going to break the law, obviously, but if I can be a mouthpiece for a mushroom, that's.
Yeah.
We were talking about this the other day, weren't we? I was like, can I watch? I'll be your buddy, and I'll just like listen and record what the mushroom has to say. Yeah.
Because you're in the book, there's a lot of it is framed around your I was going to say experiment. That's not the right word. Trial, maybe.
Oh yeah, the clinical study. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And how did you? One of the things that I sort of was thinking all the way through this, the study bit and the psilocybin stuff, was kind of going, this is quite an interesting topic to put in a book, and I wondered whether you had to tread a fine line, or whether it's like, well, it's a book, you can publish whatever you want. Was there anything that was imposed on you around that subject?
Well, the convenient thing was that the clinical study was a mainstream clinical study in the big clinical studies testing unit, and the LSD was made in governmental labs, and I think it was in Newcastle, and the whole thing was completely above board. So there was no problem talking about it. Mm-hmm. And even if, Michael Pollan wrote that big book on psychedelics recently, and he talked a lot about his personal experiences. And he told me that there was a you could talk about psychedelics legally. You could talk about your experiences with illegal drugs legally, provided you weren't too specific about the details, and they couldn't be used as a kind of as evidence against you. In this case, I just found it easier to stick to the clinical study.
Yeah, of course.
But,
of course.
Find out about CPD courses at childrenoftheforest.com. Check out the podcast links for more details.
Yeah. What were they? Did you find out what they were specifically looking at in the clinical trial? Did they tell you much about sort of their hypotheses or any specific details that they were looking at?
Yeah. So part of it was to do the basic what's called pharmacokinetics of LSD. So take blood at regular intervals and work out how fast it's processed by your body. These basic details which had not yet been recorded. And part of it was this study on creativity and problem solving. And they were repeating a study that had been done in the 60s or 70s by a chap called Jim Fadiman. And he had given his subjects mescaline, and he'd asked whether this psychedelic experience helped them to think creatively about problems, helped them to approach old problems from new angles. And so they wanted to repeat that in a modern setting with more up-to-date metrics. And so that was the aim, was to ask us to come prepared with a recalcitrant problem that we've been wrestling with, and then to see if we could make any progress on this in the psychedelic state. And I think it was very hard for them to compare. It's very hard to measure any kind of psychedelic state, because these are deeply qualitative. These are subjective experiences. These are qualitative things. They're not quantitative, and science has to turn everything into numbers to proceed. And I mean, if you're trying to turn experiences into numbers, it's going to be a bit fraught, because you're depending on these questionnaires. And when people are coming from such different backgrounds with such different problems, I mean, there's just quite a lot of variation. And so it's quite hard to draw general conclusions.
Well, I've got this great mental image of everybody who was on your study. All of them wrote a book about mushrooms, but yours was the only competent one. There's all these books floating around, everyone else.
That's hilarious. Yeah, it's possible. There was one of the people I was doing it with, one of my cohort, was a mathematician. He said that when he was encouraged to start thinking about his work-related problem in some way into the LSD experience. And so he sat down at the desk he'd been provided with, and there's a piece of paper and some pencils, and he drew a bracket at the beginning of an equation that he was going to draw, and the bracket just slithered off the page like a snake, and so he went back to bed and didn't think about maths anymore.
Sounds like the end of a children's story. Went back to bed, didn't think about maths anymore.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
So because one thing that sort of, I wondered whether they had calibrated for the fact that the problem that you brought was linked in some ways to the treatment, in a way that possibly a mathematic problem is not directly linked to LSD, but your problem was, Yeah,
it's true. I don't think there would be much of a way for them to do that. I mean, it'd be very hard to control for that somehow. It's the sort of thing that might get written down in accompanying notes. But
it's
I'm
something
not sure
that made me, because lots of not to zero in on the psychedelic aspect, but one of the things that that I was kind of interested in was, I can't remember the chap's name, but the guy that kind of popularized psychedelics in America said one of the biggest regrets he had was popularizing the drugs, but not the rituals or not the culture. And I wondered whether sort of having such a deep knowledge of the workings of fungi is a sort of culture of its own that affects, how they might interact with people.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know with these cultures, because when people talk about these cultures of use, because with LSD there was no culture of use. It was it's a completely invented substance, and so this all had to be made up as they went along, and that's it had such a turbulent early few years, partly because of this. I think that there was the way that it could be used was completely up in the air, and you had people on the one hand using it in very quiet, careful environments for tools of very profound introspection, but in this quiet and uncomplicated setting, and other people were taking it in this mad parties and very social and very wild, and so you had this complete a lot of diversity, let's say. But yeah, I'm not sure what difference it would make to know more about fungal lives. I think it would probably influence your experience, but I don't know whether it would provide you with a culture to take it within.
And then I guess broadening it out sort of wider, not just psychedelics, but all kinds of medicinal mushrooms and just fungi for food. A lot of your book that mentions how mushrooms have been worshipped for a very long time, and they are such ancient knowledge, and it sort of feels like there's been a resurgence recently, maybe just in the UK, maybe that's all my lens is. But I wondered if you had any insights or thoughts on maybe why there's been a resurgence, and also why that knowledge would get lost in the first place. We've got people like Otzi who had those fungi in his pack. Where did that go? Why don't people now know about the fungi that are around them?
Yeah. So then first of all, the lost knowledge, and then why they're having a moment. And so I think I think people have lost knowledge generally about the plants and animals and fungi that they live around and within, mainly because people don't actually live around and within these ecosystems so much. If when Nazi was around 7,000 years ago, then healthcare, food, survival would have all depended on an ability to know intimately the organisms that you were exposed to, and to know the stories, and to care about the knowledge enough, both to receive it and to pass it on. And I think we've just been slowly separated from that urgency, the urgency to know what you live around and to pass on that knowledge, because there are people who can treat you. You don't have to know about this yourself. And actually, most of what they're treating you with isn't whole plants at all. It's chemicals produced in laboratories. And so I think just like if you compared, say, our knowledge of the uses of plants and animals and fungi compared to, say, a hunter-gatherer, we'd be desperately behind them in the competition. Although some of us might have some Latin binomial names that we could throw out there, but in terms of what you could use these organisms for, how to prepare them, where and when they grew, who they associated with, all this kind of stuff. We're separated from these basic ecologies, and because of that, I think these knowledges just they just fall away. But
it's almost like now, if you, sorry to interrupt, I was just you're making me think that that's absolutely true. And also it's almost like if you do start taking an interest in these things, especially in a kind of like talking about food and medicine, rather than I'm a scientist and I'm going to study these plants and fungi in a laboratory, if you just take a kind of interest similar to the way that our ancestors might have in terms of learning uses for things, it's almost kind of like a bit of a laughing joke to some people. It's a bit like, oh, right, okay, you hippie, you weirdo. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of not even lost, but almost kind of people don't believe in it anymore. They've lost, as you say, they've lost that connection with the fact that stuff that's produced in a lab or a factory does have an origin in the stuff that is all around us. And that is still true. But so many people have just, don't believe in it anymore. It's interesting.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting when you're asking about why fungi are having this moment or this resurgence of interest. And I think part of it is a resurgence of interest because I think our ancestors, particularly when we were hunter-gatherer communities, would have spent a lot more time thinking about mushrooms than we do, because they had to. But also. So there's something of a resurgence in the sense that we're recovering an interest in organisms that we might once have been more interested in or as interested in. But also I think a lot of this knowledge right now is new. I mean, a lot of this depends on these new techniques that have been developed, like DNA sequencing, for example, which allows us to study in the soil, what fungal species are where. And this stuff would have been completely out of the reach of anyone even decades ago, let alone several thousand years ago. And so I think we can actually see a load of things that were just not available to our ancestors, and this is very, very fresh. There's not just DNA sequencing, but all sorts of tracing techniques that allow us to measure things passing from one organism to another, and microscopes that allow us to see what's going on in these inaccessible places. And this is the thing with fungi, they live their lives so out of our reach, out of the reach at least of our immediate senses. And so it's hard to really get a sense of what's going on. And that's, I think, part of the reason why they've been so neglected for so long.
Yeah.
It's interesting, that's because you kind of touched on it there, but the idea of horizontal gene transfer, that thing that for people listening that haven't heard the term, it's that sort of traits moving sideways rather than parent to child, or it's just being in contact with another organism. Would that be fair? Would that be the right description?
Yeah, well, it depends on what kind of organism. I mean, with bacteria, who do it all the time, they have different ways of transferring genes between them. Sometimes they can just absorb a gene, a little amount of DNA that's hanging out in their environment. They can just engulf it. Sometimes they can have very explicit sort of bacterium to bacterium exchanges with this sort of tubes that form where they exchange genetic material. And sometimes it's transferred between organisms by viruses as these vectors of genes that just leap around, carried by viruses. So there are a number of ways it can happen. But yeah, as you said, the most crucial point is that it allows organisms to pick up traits partway through a lifetime without having to combine with another organism and produce a new generation with those new traits. You can just, it's a bit like us learning something. We're used to horizontal transfer of information. It happens all the time. When you learn languages, you acquire this trait over the course of your lifetime. The same with any other skill.
But it would be the equivalent of, say, me learning French during my lifetime and then my children being able to speak French by just virtue of being children.
Or it would be the equivalent of you walking up to someone and exchanging your curly hair for their dimples.
I mean, I would take any hair at this point. It's so that concept, that's one of the ones that when I was listening to your book, I had to really stop and just think and digest that, because it's so almost, I don't want to say contrary, but so different to the way at least my worldview was of, I understand, the theory of evolution and I understand how things move. And then this just comes in from the side like a truck and you just go, okay, I've got to reevaluate everything. I wondered if you'd come up against anyone, any sort of, not necessarily negative feedback, but any maybe challenges to people going, this is too far-fetched, this can't all be true. A bit like yourself when you reread your book.
Applications for Forest School training are now open at childrenoftheforest.com. Check out the podcast links for more details.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the scientific community, there's a few things have been bubbling away. These debates have been bubbling away for a few decades now. The importance of symbiosis in evolution is one, and horizontal gene transfer is another. Not whether or not it takes place, but how big a factor it is in evolution. It's a big deal for bacteria. They do this on a daily basis, but it had been confined to bacteria by some who didn't want this to seep out too much into the wider world, because it so changed our understanding of the way that life had proceeded. But as time has gone by, it's become clear that the bacteria aren't the only organisms to have practiced horizontal gene transfer, and actually genes have moved between all the main groups of life forms, and so there's some resistance within some in the evolutionary circles who don't like the idea of changing the conventional picture of evolution as this proceeding vertically on the whole, from generation to generation, in this rather human way. And there's a whole load of people who think, no, we need to really rethink what we mean by evolution now, because these other currents have come in and they totally change the previous picture. They introduce enough new ideas to our understanding of evolution that we need to expand our evolutionary models. And so they propose something called the extended evolutionary synthesis. And the extended evolutionary synthesis would take account of much more thorough account of horizontal gene transfer as a major force in evolution, of symbiosis as a major force in evolution. And it's the extended evolutionary synthesis that draw pictures of the history of life rather than as this bifurcating tree, more like a big web or cobweb or mycelial network.
Yeah, I completely took that kind of sort of feeling from reading your book, the symbiosis, which I thought, well, why is this so new to me? I don't remember ever at school in science learning about how important symbiosis is and how that is how life works. And when you think about it, I mean, even before knowing about the new stuff that you're talking about in terms of fungi, even thinking about just nature generally and the things that we have known for a long time, it being presented like a web, as you describe, rather than a tree from the get-go from a young age, makes way more sense, and B is a much more useful way of looking at the world, isn't it, in terms of thinking about conserving it and using it in a respectful way, because then you really are aware of everything linking together, and the balance being potentially tipped by our behaviour. I think it would be, interesting if it took on more of that in education.
I completely agree. I mean, once you realise that we aren't just neatly separable individuals, but we consist of all these microbial cells, and our bodies, these open systems in constant interchange with their environment, that we're no more separable from our environment than anything. Any organism is separable from its environment. I mean, this idea is a very human idea that we use to organize our lives, but actually doesn't have much bearing on biological reality. And I think it really does change our understanding of the living world, because it becomes clear that all organisms are completely meshed together in interdependence, and that a trauma or violence in one place can cascade through the system and have impacts in other places that you wouldn't necessarily expect. I think it's exactly by imagining ourselves as separable from each other and from the living worlds that we justify environmental exploitation. And once we have revised our understanding of ourselves as so embedded within the living world, that we ourselves, our bodies, are the outcome of an ecological network of interactions, then it becomes much harder to justify environmental devastation, because we understand that we are much more embedded in it than we might have thought.
It kind of strikes me that a lot of what you just said, you could kind of imply it not just on a biological level, but on a societal level, and it really, I found it very interesting. I think it's the part that's in your book that's talking about lichen and this idea of queer lichens, or queer something, and it made me wonder whether you have had any I don't want to say epiphanies, but whether you've realized something through fungal research that you've then gone, oh, actually, this applies to my day-to-day life or my relationships in this way, and whether the mushrooms that you study have made you make any sort of changes in your humanity.
I was going to ask exactly the same question, or any behavioural changes.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, this is part of the reason why I found myself so curious about this kingdom of life, because I think we have the power to change the way we think and feel and imagine. And one of the big ways that thinking and learning about fungi has changed my life is in this question of the individual, thinking about individuals rather than as this just a given, that I am my body, and my body stops where it seems to stop, and it starts where it seems to start, and that's so are all other organisms. That actually this individuality thing is more of a human idea, and it reflects the need for us to organize our lives in certain ways, and behaviors in certain ways, and responsibilities in certain ways. And that actually, when we think of selfhood in the biological world, of which of course we are a part, that it becomes much more like an open question than an answer known in advance. And so it seems that there are these nested selves. We've made up of all these nested selves. You have, these microbes living inside you, which on their own, if you looked at about one bacterium, you think, okay, that's one bacterium, that's a single bacterium. But that's part of a whole system, which is inside you, which is part of your stomach, which is inside different parts of you, which all have these different roles and micro environments. And so to think of us as being made up of these nested selves, and then even be part of larger selves that, outside our own bodies, maybe collective selves. This I found very helpful, and really something that has just shifted the dials somewhat of my experience, and continues to astonish me. And there are so many, and with other organisms too. When I hold a plant, to hold this organism and to realize that this isn't just a singular being. This is the outcome of hundreds of millions of years old symbiosis. And this is an alga which has evolved to farm fungi, and fungi which has evolved to farm algae. And that's what I'm holding. That's what I'm eating every day. That's what sustains my life and the lives of all of those who came before me. All this, there's a kind of sense of vertigo about selfhood, a vertigo about relationship, and an understanding that the smallest unit of analysis really is relationship. You can't have thinghood, really. I mean, you can have things are helpful concepts, of course, but that really biology is just relationships all the way down. And so to feel these basic principles expressed in one's own life and in one's own encounters with the world, with more than human organisms and with other humans, I find this is quite profound.
Support the podcast today by becoming a Patreon member at childrenoftheforest.com. Check out the podcast links for more details.
The way you described it there was both the first sense that I felt as you were describing that shift of perspective was that is a really relaxing and reassuring way of looking at yourself and the world, that actually, there's quite a lot of chat about kind of being mindfulness, and being aware of your mind and what you're thinking, and being able to detach yourself slightly from that and observe your thoughts, but it's not necessarily you, it's just a thought. And then if you extend that to, as you're talking about the nested selves, well, actually you're not just your mind and yourself, you've got all this other stuff going on. And that's actually, I find that quite a peaceful and relaxing thought. And then, as you say, to kind of extend that out into the rest of Earth. And then as you were continuing to talk, I suddenly thought, that's really like religion, actually. That's it's that kind of profound. And I think that's why the comfort comes in. It's sort of like, we're all connected, and it's not just me kind of fighting for survival. It's, that's a really lovely way of looking at the world.
I had the exact opposite reaction.
Did you? Did you freak out?
Oh, it's too much. Why can't I just? I had a sudden urge to go, right, but a pen can just be a pen, can't it? I can just think about it being a pen. I don't have to go, but I just.
But you've had that the whole way through. Like, we've been, obviously, you've both been like reading the book at the same time, and then seeing each other at work. A few dates break, and go, so how are you getting on with the book, and where are you and stuff? And you've just been going, I hate it. I mean, I love it. I love the book, but I just can't deal with it. I just hate it. It's just melting my mind.
It's a bit of like can't be unseen. Once every paragraph or chapter that went in, I just went, well, I can't look at the floor anymore now, can I? Without having a little brain melt about the floor and what the ground's doing and all the fungi underneath it. There's miles and miles and miles of it. It used to just be the floor, Merlin. I used to just walk on it, and I was happy.
You used to just love digging holes. You used to love digging holes in the woods, right? Just like, being a little dwarf man and digging holes in the woods. Now you're going to be thinking, oh no, the myceliums I'm destroying as I'm digging the hole.
Crikey.
I joke. I do. It is an incredible book, Merlin, and I hope you understand what I mean when I say it hurts.
Totally understand what you mean. No, I think that's hilarious, and also and it does raise this point. It is easier for us to understand the world in these simpler terms, in non-relational or less relational terms. And these ideas do worry so many of our categories that we've grown up with, and now we cherish and lean on for support. And that when you start to melt those, it can be worrying. And so I'm sorry if I've caused you.
Did you grow up with those? Did you grow up with the same sort of concepts, or has this stuff been in your life sort of in perpetuity, and it's never really been a sort of lighting of a fire? It's just been a constant.
Well, a mixture. I've definitely grown up with some of these ideas, and but the more I studied symbiosis, and the more I realized quite how how intense this was, quite how ubiquitous this was, and that this has been a journey for me for sure. And it's one of these things, like fungi in general. The more you learn, the weirder it gets. It feels very much like this, like a corridor that you can see stretching on forever, with just doors branching off this corridor, and you can just go down and down and down and open door and door after door. And so these ideas have been familiar to me, but the more I've thought about them, the stranger they've got.
And I hesitate to ask, but are you done now? Is there anything more coming? Do I need to prepare my brain? What's coming next?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not totally sure. I want to do some more research. There's so many exciting things to explore. So I'm lining up some new research avenues, particularly into the use of electrical signaling in fungal networks, and using these pulses of electricity to communicate amongst themselves, amongst their rambling bodies. And so that's something I really want to explore. And otherwise, I've been so busy with talking about fungi right now that I've had so little chance actually to think about what's next. But so it'll be a mixture of maybe a little bit of writing something or other, and then and some more experiments for the time.
I'm not going to read it, whatever it is.
Well, I am. I'm going to come to work going, guess what, Lewis? Guess what? I just found out. Guess what Merlin just told me? I have a question that's less profound, right? So in the book, you talk about making wine and things like that. And I saw you eating the mushrooms that grew from your book. Are you involved in making any fun stuff at the moment in terms of eating and drinking?
Yeah, well, I mean, I had somewhat less time to do this because of the all this time. This irony, it's spend all this time talking about mushrooms to people, fungi to people, and so there's less time to actually handle them in your own life. So, I do have some good ferments, and I've got some pickled lemons on, which are really good. We brine lemons, and it makes this amazing, like sort of savoury marmalade almost.
Nice.
And I've got some umeboshi sloe, so fermenting some sloes in this Japanese style, umeboshi plums, they're called. And most excitingly, I've got a load of hot sauces on. I make hot sauce, fermented hot sauce, my brother Cosmo, and we've got a whole new exciting batch of experimental hot sauces on the go.
Ooh, what's experimental about it?
We just do this. They're different. They're different from our last ones, so they're experimental for us, but and also in the sense that we're not sure quite what will happen. We tweaked a few parts of the formulas.
That's the next book then. Hot sauce is not just hot sauce, it's
an entire book.
Yeah, do exactly. A food web, just talk about how all food is connected.
Yeah, that would be exciting. Yeah. Recipes.
Great, thank you so much for speaking to us and giving us your time today. Is there any? I know you were involved in the UK Fungus Day at the weekend, and I think some of that content is probably still available online. I haven't had a chance to catch up with it yet. But is there anywhere else that people can catch you speaking? Probably on the internet now, I guess, in these current times. But
the best thing to do is to go to my website, which is merlinsheldrake.com. And there's loads of information there, and various videos and pieces of writing and things. So that's what I'd suggest.
I've been enjoying your Instagram as well. And
get the book, of course. So and Instagram as well. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I hope your back gets better.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.
That's brilliant.
Cheers.
Okay, cheers, Merlin.
Bye.
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 Ladies and gentlemen.
If you like this podcast and want to support more episodes, you can donate through Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Children of the Forest to show your support for the Forest School podcast.